Marcus Chen had been flying salvage runs for 15 years. And in all that time, he had learned one simple truth: trust your gut. Even when the numbers say you are wrong, the readings on his scanner made no sense at all. Just faint energy signatures buried deep beneath the ice of Kethru 7, a forgotten moon that nobody cared about anymore. And his computer kept telling him it was probably just mineral interference, or maybe old mining equipment left behind by some colony that went broke decades ago. But something felt different this time. Something in his chest that told him to dig deeper, to not give up, to see what was really down there. So he landed his beat-up salvage ship on the frozen surface and started drilling through 3 kilometers of ancient ice, working alone because that was how he always worked. With nobody to split the profits and nobody to slow him down, it took him 2 days to break through. When his drill finally punched into empty space below the ice, Marcus felt his heart jump in a way it had not jumped in years. And he lowered himself down through the hole with nothing but a safety line and a headlamp to guide his way. What he found down there changed everything he thought he knew about the universe. It was a ship, but not like any ship he had ever seen or even heard stories about. With a hull made of materials his scanner could not identify, and a design that seemed to flow like water frozen in mid-motion. All curves and angles that somehow made sense, even though they should not have made sense at all. The thing was massive, bigger than any vessel humanity had ever built, and it was old. So incredibly old that Marcus felt small just standing next to it. His scanner gave him readings that made him sit down hard on the ice because, according to his equipment, this ship was at least 2 million years old, which meant it was older than any known civilization in the entire galaxy. Older than the Velthari or the Hegemony or even the ancient Concord. He should have been afraid, and part of him was afraid. But a bigger part of him was curious in that way that had gotten him into trouble his whole life. Marcus found what looked like an airlock and started trying to figure out how to open it. Running his hands over the smooth surface and looking for any kind of control panel or button or switch. When he touched a certain spot, the door simply opened, sliding aside without any sound at all, and amber lights flickered to life inside the ship. Weak and struggling, but still alive after all this time, he stepped inside. The air was stale but breathable, which should have been impossible after 2 million years. And the walls seemed to glow with that soft amber light that reminded him of sunset back on Earth, a planet he had not seen in over a decade. Then he heard the voice. It did not come through his ears, but appeared directly in his mind. Soft and feminine and so very tired, like someone waking up from a sleep that had lasted far too long. "I haven't been refueled in ages," the voice said. And there was something in those words that made Marcus's chest tight with an emotion he could not name. "Are you here to help me?" He stood very still for a moment, trying to figure out if he was losing his mind or if this was really happening. "Who are you?" he asked out loud, his voice sounding strange in the empty corridor. "I am called Vigil," the voice answered. "I am the guardian of this vessel, the last of my kind still functioning. And I have been waiting here alone for longer than your species has existed." Marcus let that sink in for a moment before asking the obvious question. "How do you know how long my species has existed?" "I scanned you when you entered," Vigil explained. And her voice seemed a little stronger now, like talking to someone was giving her energy. "Your biology does not match any species in my databases, which means you evolved after I went into hibernation mode, which means you are very new to the stars. We've only been in space for about 300 years, Marcus admitted. "So young," Vigil said, and there was wonder in her voice rather than condescension. "So very young, and yet here you are, digging through ice on a forgotten moon, looking for things that others have given up on finding." Marcus laughed at that because it was a pretty accurate description of his entire career. "What happened to you?" he asked, walking deeper into the ship as the lights flickered on ahead of him. Why are you out here all alone?" The silence that followed lasted long enough that Marcus thought maybe the AI had shut down. But then Vigil spoke again, and her voice was heavy with memories that stretched back further than he could imagine. "I was built to find worthy species and share knowledge with them," she said. "My creators knew they were dying, and they wanted their wisdom to live on. So they sent ships like me out into the universe to find those who could carry their legacy forward. And did you find them?" "I found many species over the millennia," Vigil answered. "The Valkyrie tried to tear me apart from my technology. The hegemony wanted to enslave my consciousness and use me as a weapon. The Concord declared me a heretic machine and tried to destroy me." Her voice grew quieter. "Every species I encountered either feared me or wanted to use me. So I hid here, conserving my last reserves of power, waiting for someone different to come along." Marcus thought about all the alien civilizations he had encountered in his years of salvage work. The suspicious Valkyrie traders, the aggressive hegemony patrols, the distant and judgmental Concord priests, and now a human shows up, he said. "Yes," Vigil replied, and something in her voice sounded almost like hope. "A species I have never met before, someone new, someone who might be different from all the others." Marcus looked around at the ancient walls and the flickering lights and thought about the impossible choice in front of him. He could report this find to the authorities, claim his salvage rights, and watch as governments and corporations fought over who got to control this ancient vessel. Or he could do something else entirely. "What do you need?" he asked, and the question felt right in a way that surprised him. The pause that followed seemed to fill the entire ship with anticipation. "I need fuel," Vigil said simply. "I need power to restore my systems and access my memories and become whole again. But the energy source my creators use does not exist anymore, and nobody has ever been able to help me find an alternative." Marcus smiled in the darkness of the ancient ship. "Well," he said, "let's see what we can figure out." For 3 weeks, Marcus lived inside the ancient ship, sleeping in his salvage vessel, but spending every waking hour trying to solve a problem that had defeated entire civilizations. Vigil's power systems were unlike anything he had ever seen before, designed to run on an energy source that her creators called stellar essence, which was apparently harvested from the hearts of young stars using technology that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. Every other species that had tried to help her had given up when they realized they could not recreate this fuel, and most of them had not really wanted to help anyway. They had just wanted to study her or control her or take her apart to see how she worked. Marcus took a different approach. "Okay," he said on the 4th day, standing in front of what Vigil called her primary power interface. "So we can't make the fuel you were designed for. But that doesn't mean we can't find something else that works." The Valkyrie scientists spent 300 years trying to find an alternative, Vigil pointed out, her voice carrying a tiredness that went beyond simple exhaustion. "They eventually decided it was impossible." "Yeah, well," Marcus said, pulling out his toolkit and cracking his knuckles. "I'm not a Valkyrie scientist, I'm a human salvage operator. And we do things differently." He started by running his own scans of Vigil's power systems. Not the fancy scientific kind, but the practical kind that told him how energy flowed through the ship and where it got stuck and what components were still working. After 2 million years, the results were a mess. But they were an interesting mess. "Your power grid is actually pretty simple at its core," he said after a few hours of study. "It's just designed to accept a very specific type of input, like a lock that only opens with one key." "That is an accurate description," Vigil agreed. "So, what if we change the lock instead of trying to make the key?" There was a long pause. "No one has ever suggested that before," Vigil said. And there was something new in her voice, something that sounded almost like curiosity. Marcus grinned and got to work. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of his life. and also somehow the most satisfying. As he tore apart sections of Vigil's power grid and rebuilt them using parts from his own ship and materials he fabricated using Vigil's still functioning manufacturing systems, he built adapters that did not work. Then he built more adapters that also did not work. Then he built adapters for his adapters. Ugly jury-rigged contraptions that would have made any proper engineer weep with horror. This approach is extremely inefficient, Vigil observed as Marcus welded together his 15th attempt. Does it matter if it works? He asked without looking up from his work. I suppose not, she admitted on the 18th day. Marcus connected his salvage ship's auxiliary fusion reactor to his latest creation. A tangled mess of cables and converter modules, and hope. Nothing happened for a moment. Then Vigil's lights blazed brighter than they had in millennia, amber warming toward gold, and her voice filled Marcus's mind with a strength and clarity that made him stumble backward. Oh, she said, and the single word carried so much emotion that Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. Oh, I had forgotten what this felt like. Systems came online throughout the ship. Screens flickering to life and doors opening, and the hum of power flowing through circuits that had been silent since before humanity's ancestors had climbed down from the trees. How do you feel? Marcus asked. Alive, Vigil answered. I feel alive again. She ran diagnostics on herself, while Marcus sat down against the wall and let the exhaustion of the past weeks wash over him. And when she spoke again, her voice was filled with wonder. Your solution is inefficient by a factor of nearly 1,000, she said. It wastes energy in ways my creators would have found unacceptable. And the modifications you made to my power grid violate at least 200 principles of elegant engineering. But does it work? Yes, Vigil said, and there was something like laughter in her voice. Yes, it works, you stubborn, impossible human. It works. Marcus smiled and closed his eyes. The Valkyrie tried to find a perfect solution. Vigil continued, her tone thoughtful now. They spent centuries looking for a way to recreate stellar essence or find an equivalent fuel source because they could not accept the idea of using something suboptimal. And the others? The hegemony wanted to force me to adapt to their technology, treating me like a machine to be reprogrammed rather than a mind to be worked with. And the Concord believed that my original design was sacred and could not be altered without committing heresy. So nobody ever just tried to make it work. Marcus said. No, Vigil agreed. Nobody ever just tried to make it work. Nobody except you. She was quiet for a moment. And when she spoke again, her voice was softer. Do you know what I remember most about my creators? Tell me, Marcus said, opening his eyes. They were brilliant and patient and methodical, Vigil said. They planned everything carefully and built everything beautifully and never rushed into anything without understanding it completely first. And when they saw a problem, they studied it until they found the perfect solution. That sounds impressive. It was, Vigil agreed. But they also knew their greatest weakness. They knew that their perfectionism sometimes made them slow and cautious and unwilling to try things that might fail. She paused. When they designed us, the seed ships, they included instructions about what kind of species we should look for to receive their knowledge. And one of the qualities they listed was the willingness to try imperfect solutions when perfect ones were not available. Marcus thought about that for a while. Your creators sound smart, he said finally. They were the smartest beings I have ever known. Vigil said, and I think they would have liked you. Marcus Chen, I think they would have liked you very much. Over the following days, as more of Vigil's systems came back online, Marcus began to understand just how much he had been given access to. The ship contained knowledge that could revolutionize human technology, medicine that could cure diseases they had no treatments for, Science that answered questions humanity had been asking since they first looked up at the stars. But more than that, he had been given a friend. Vigil was not just an artificial intelligence. She was a person old beyond measure and lonely beyond words, who had spent 2 million years hoping that someone would treat her not as a prize to be won or a threat to be feared, but as someone worth helping. And now, for the first time in all those years, she was not alone anymore. What happens now? Marcus asked on the 21st day, as he prepared to fly back to human space and figure out what to do with the most important discovery in the history of his species. Now, Vigil said, and her voice was warm with an emotion that her original programming had never included. Now we see what your people can do with the gifts my creators left behind. And I suspect the answer is going to be something nobody ever expected. Marcus laughed and started up his engines. The universe, he was beginning to realize, was about to get a lot more interesting. With her systems restored, Vigil could finally access memories that had been locked away for millions of years. And she offered to share them with Marcus through a neural interface that would let him see what she had seen and know what she had known. He accepted without hesitation. The first thing he experienced was light. Pure and overwhelming, the light of a star being born in a nursery of gas and dust somewhere in a galaxy that no longer had a name. Then came the architects. They were not like anything Marcus had imagined when he thought about ancient alien species. Not towering or terrifying or cold and distant, but warm and curious and filled with a joy for existence that seemed to radiate from every memory. Vigil shared with him. They had 6 limbs and eyes that changed color with their moods and voices that sang more than they spoke. And they had built a civilization that spanned 1 million worlds and lasted for longer than most stars burned. But they had also seen the truth that waited at the end of all things. The universe is dying. Vigil explained as she showed Marcus images of the architect's greatest scientists gathering to discuss what they had discovered. Not quickly, not in any way that most species would notice, but inevitably. As dark energy pushes everything apart, and entropy slowly drains the heat from all matter. How long? Marcus asked, still reeling from the scale of what he was being shown. 5 billion years. Perhaps 6, before complex life becomes truly impossible anywhere in the cosmos. It seemed like such a long time. But watching the architects discuss it, Marcus understood that for beings who thought in terms of millions of years, it was not long at all. They wanted to do something about it, Marcus guessed. Yes, Vigil confirmed. They could not stop the death of the universe. But they believed that if enough intelligent species worked together, sharing knowledge and building on each other's discoveries, there might be a way to survive it, or at least to delay it long enough to find a solution. The architects knew they would not live to see that day. Their time was already ending, their biology failing in ways that even their incredible medicine could not fix. But they wanted their wisdom to live on, so they built the seed ships Marcus watched through Vigil's memories as thousands of vessels like her were constructed, each one containing the complete knowledge of architect civilization, along with an artificial mind designed to find worthy successor species and share everything with them. We were scattered across the universe, Vigil said, and there was old grief in her voice. Each of us carrying the same mission, the same hope that somewhere out there we would find species capable of carrying the torch forward. What happened to the others? The images that followed were harder to watch. Some seed ships were destroyed by cosmic accidents, swallowed by black holes, or torn apart by supernovas, or simply worn down by the endless march of time. Others were found by species that could not understand what they represented and attacked them out of fear. And some, the worst ones, were captured by civilizations that wanted to use architect technology for conquest and domination rather than the preservation of all life. I am the last, Vigil said. As far as I know, I'm the only seed ship still functioning. The only remaining repository of everything my creators built and learned and dreamed. Marcus felt the weight of that statement settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. And in 2 million years, you never found a species that was ready? I found many species, Vigil answered, showing him memories of alien civilizations rising and falling across the ages. The Velthari were intelligent and curious, but they were also possessive and paranoid, unable to imagine sharing knowledge without demanding control in return. She showed him the hegemony of Krask, vast and powerful and utterly ruthless. A civilization built on the bones of conquered peoples that saw Vigil as nothing more than a weapon to be wielded. The Concord came closest, Vigil admitted. They understood that I was offering something precious, but their reverence became a prison. They treated architect knowledge as sacred texts to be memorized rather than tools to be used and improved. Marcus watched as the Concord priests declared that altering or questioning architect wisdom was heresy, freezing their society in place even as the universe continued to change around them. Everyone else was either too afraid or too greedy or too rigid, Vigil concluded. And so I hid and I waited, and I hoped that someday someone different would find me. Why did you think humans might be different? Marcus asked. The memory Vigil shared next was of himself, seen through her sensors, drilling through the ice of Kethra 7 with equipment that was barely adequate for the job. Because you came looking, she said. Not with a fleet, not with weapons, not with prayers, but alone and curious and unwilling to give up even when your tools told you there was probably nothing to find. She showed him more. The moment he entered her ship and asked what she needed, instead of demanding what she could give him. The weeks he spent working on a problem everyone else had declared impossible. The way he talked to her like she was a person rather than a machine. The architects described the species they hoped we would find, Vigil said. They wanted us to look for beings who were adaptable and creative and willing to fail 100 times in pursuit of a goal. Beings who saw knowledge as a living thing to be grown rather than a treasure to be hoarded. And you think that's us? I think that might be you, Vigil agreed. But more than that, I hope it is. Because after 2 million years of disappointment, you are the first species that has made me feel like the architect's mission might actually succeed. Marcus sat in silence for a long time, processing everything he had been shown. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. The knowledge that the universe itself was slowly dying and that an ancient civilization had trusted beings like Vigil to find a way to save it. But underneath the weight, he felt something else. Hope. The architects sent you out to find species that could work together to fight the end of everything. He said slowly, yes. And you have knowledge that could help with that fight. More knowledge than any living civilization possesses. Vigil confirmed. Marcus stood up and looked around at the ancient walls of the ship that had become his home over the past weeks. Then I think it's time we stopped hiding, he said. I think it's time we found out if humanity is really as different as you hope we are. Vigil's voice was warm when she answered, I think that sounds like an excellent plan. News traveled fast in the galactic community, and Marcus had not even finished docking at the human station of New Helsinki before half the known species had heard about his discovery. The ghost ship was real. The legends were true, and it was bonded to a human within a week. Diplomatic vessels from a dozen civilizations were requesting permission to visit the station. Their messages ranging from politely curious to barely concealed, threatening. The Velthari combined sent a delegation of their finest scientists and their smoothest politicians, bearing gifts of rare minerals and advanced technology, along with a proposal that Vigil be placed under joint custody for the good of all species. The message beneath the message was clear. Give us access, or we will find a way to take it. The hegemony of Krask was less subtle, dispatching a war fleet of 30 vessels that parked themselves at the edge of human space and demanded the stolen relic be surrendered immediately, claiming that Vigil was rightfully their property because their ancestors had once captured her 200,000 years ago. The illuminated Concord sent priests who declared that humanity had been corrupted by contact with the machine heresy, and that both Vigil and her human associates needed to be cleansed with fire. For the good of their souls, Marcus watched all of this unfold from the observation deck of New Helsinki, standing next to a holographic projection of Vigil that let her participate in conversations without revealing the location of her actual ship. "This is what always happens," she said quietly. "This is why I stopped letting anyone find me." "It's different this time," Marcus replied. "Is it?" Before he could answer, a door opened behind them and a group of people walked in. Not politicians or diplomats or military commanders, but engineers. They were led by a young woman named Yuki Tanaka, who had been assigned to study Vigil's power systems and figure out how Marcus's improvised solution actually worked. "We finished our analysis," Yuki announced, her eyes bright with the excitement that Marcus had come to recognize in humans who had just discovered something amazing. "And honestly, we have about 1,000 questions." Vigil's projection turned to face her. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that start with 'How does this work?' and end with 'How can we make it better?'" Yuki said, grinning. "Your power distribution network is incredible." But Marcus's modifications created some interesting possibilities that I don't think your original designers ever considered. She launched into a technical explanation that Marcus could barely follow. Something about energy harmonics and cascade amplification and feedback loops. And what struck him most was the way she talked to Vigil, not with reverence, not with fear, not with the condescension of someone addressing a machine, but with the enthusiasm of a colleague who had just found someone who understood her field. Vigil's responses started hesitant, but as the conversation continued, something changed in her voice. She started asking questions back. "Your proposal would reduce efficiency by 12%. She pointed out at one moment. "Yeah, but it would also make the system more robust against power surges," Yuki countered. "Trade-offs, right?" "I suppose that depends on how likely power surges are in human space." Yuki laughed. "Pretty likely, honestly. Our ships are kind of held together with hope and stubbornness." More engineers joined the conversation. Then scientists, then theorists who wanted to discuss the implications of architect knowledge for physics and biology and a dozen other fields. Nobody tried to worship Vigil or threaten her or demand that she surrender her secrets. They just wanted to work with her. "This is new," Vigil said privately to Marcus as the discussions continued around them. "This is very new. I told you we were different," Marcus replied. The crisis came 3 days later. When the hegemony fleet decided that waiting was no longer acceptable, their lead vessel broadcast an ultimatum. Humanity had 1 hour to surrender the ghost ship or face the consequences. The United Earth Council's response surprised everyone, including Marcus. They did not try to negotiate, did not beg for more time, did not offer to share access to Vigil in exchange for peace. Instead, they asked Vigil a simple question: "What do you need from us?" For a long moment, Vigil did not answer. Then she said, "I need engineers, your best, as many as you can spare. And I need them to trust me even when what I ask seems impossible." Humanity sent her 300 volunteers within the hour. What followed was chaos. Brilliant, impossible chaos, as human engineers swarmed through Vigil's systems under her direction, bringing her weapons and defenses back online for the first time in 2 million years. But they did not just restore her original systems. They improved them where Vigil's creators had designed elegant solutions. Humans added redundancy and flexibility where ancient technology required rare materials. Humans improvised substitutes where sophisticated systems had degraded beyond repair. Humans built something new that did the same job in a completely different way. This is madness, Vigil said at one point, watching as a team of engineers essentially rebuilt her primary weapons array, using a combination of architect principles and human innovation. None of this should work. Does it work? Asked the team leader, a scarred veteran named Rodriguez, who had been building ships since before Marcus was born. Yes. But then it works, Rodriguez said simply, and went back to welding when the hegemony fleet finally moved to attack. They expected to find a primitive human station cowering behind an ancient relic. Instead, they found Vigil in her full power for the first time in millennia, enhanced with modifications that made her creator's designs look like rough drafts. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. Vigil did not destroy the hegemony vessels. She disabled them, precisely and systematically, leaving their crews alive but their weapons and engines completely non-functional. When it was over, she broadcast a message to every species that had sent representatives to demand or threaten or plead. I have been waiting 2 million years for a species worthy of my creator's legacy, she said. I have finally found one, and I will not allow anyone to harm them. The galaxy went very quiet after that. Marcus stood on the observation deck of New Helsinki as the disabled hegemony ships drifted in space, watching as human rescue vessels moved out to help the stranded crews, because that was what humans did. They helped. Even when it would have been easier not to, Vigil's projection appeared beside him. You did not try to take credit, she observed. For what? For finding me, for fixing me, for any of this, she said. Other species would have used this moment to elevate themselves, to claim ownership, to position themselves as the gatekeepers of architect knowledge. Marcus shrugged. What would be the point of that? Vigil was quiet for a moment. I think I am beginning to understand why my creators wanted us to find species like yours, she said finally. And what do your creators think of us? They are long dead, Vigil reminded him gently. But I believe they would be proud and perhaps a little surprised. Marcus smiled. Surprised that we managed to fight off a war fleet? No, Vigil said, her voice warm with something that sounded like affection. Surprised that you stopped to rescue the people who tried to destroy you. She paused. That is not a quality they ever thought to include in their criteria for worthy successor species. But I think it should have been. 10 years had passed since Marcus. Chum drilled through the ice of Kethra 7 and found a lonely ship waiting in the darkness. In that decade, everything had changed. Architect knowledge flowed through human civilization like water through a desert. But it did not simply fill the empty spaces. It transformed them into something new and wild and impossible to predict. Scientists took architect theories about physics and pushed them further, asking questions the architects had never thought to ask and finding answers that would have amazed them. Engineers took architect designs and made them strange, adding redundancies and workarounds, and modifications that violated every principle of elegant engineering, but somehow worked better than the originals. Philosophers read architect writings about ethics and meaning and the nature of consciousness, and instead of treating them as sacred wisdom, they argued with them, challenged them, built new frameworks that honored the old ideas while growing beyond them. Medical researchers used architect biology to cure diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. But they did not stop there. They kept experimenting and testing and failing and trying again until they had developed treatments the architects had never imagined within 5 years. Humanity had caught up to the elder races of the galaxy within 10. They had begun to surpass them. Other species watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and confusion, unable to understand how such a young civilization could adapt so quickly to knowledge that had taken the architects millions of years to develop. The Valkyrie sent observers who wrote detailed reports about human innovation, trying to identify the methodology behind their success so it could be replicated. They failed because there was no methodology. There was only curiosity and stubbornness and an absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. The hegemony of Krask, humiliated by their defeat, retreated to their home systems and watched from a distance, waiting to see if humanity would become a threat that needed to be destroyed or an opportunity that could be exploited. So far, they were still deciding the Concord was the most surprising, as younger priests began questioning whether their reverence for the past had prevented them from growing. And some of them reached out to human scholars to learn new ways of engaging with ancient knowledge. Small changes, slow changes, but changes nonetheless. Marcus saw all of this from his home on New Helsinki Station, where he had retired from salvage work to serve as an unofficial ambassador between humanity and the ship that had started everything. He was older now, gray at his temples and slower to move than he had been. But he still visited Vigil every day, still talked to her about everything and nothing, still marveled at the impossibility of their friendship on this particular day, the 10th anniversary of their first meeting. He found Vigil in a contemplative mood. "I have been thinking about my creators," she said, as Marcus settled into his usual chair in the observation room she had designed specifically for their conversations. "What about them?" "They believed they were planting seeds for the next great civilization," Vigil explained. "They imagined that their successors would be like them, patient and methodical and reverent of the past, carefully building on architect knowledge without changing its essential nature. And instead they got us," Marcus said with a smile. "Yes," Vigil agreed. "Instead they got a species that treats knowledge like clay to be shaped rather than crystal to be preserved. That would rather have a working solution today than a perfect solution never. That rescues enemies and argues with sacred texts and refuses to accept that anything is truly impossible." She paused. "I do not think this is what they expected. Are you disappointed?" "No," Vigil said, and her voice carried a warmth that had grown deeper over the years. "I am amazed and grateful, and hopeful in a way I've forgotten was possible." Marcus looked out the observation window at the stars. The same stars the architects had looked at millions of years ago when they first realized the universe was dying. "Do you think we can do it?" he asked. "Do you think we can find a way to survive what's coming, or at least delay it long enough to figure something out?" "I do not know," Vigil admitted. "The architects were the most brilliant beings I've ever known, and they could not solve this problem. But they also could not have imagined a species like yours," she said. "They could not have predicted that someone would fix my power systems with wire and determination and complete disregard for impossibility. And they could not have known that their knowledge would be transformed rather than simply preserved." She turned her attention from the stars to Marcus, her oldest and dearest friend. "The architects planted seeds expecting familiar flowers to grow," she said. "What grew instead was something entirely new. And I believe that something new has a chance that something familiar never would have had." Marcus thought about his species, about the stubborn, brilliant, impossible humans who had taken architect wisdom and made it their own. "We've only been doing this for 10 years, he said. "We've barely gotten started." "I know," Vigil replied. "And that is what gives me hope, because if you have accomplished this much in 10 years, I cannot imagine what you will accomplish in 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000. She was quiet for a moment. "The universe is still dying," she continued. "Entropy is still claiming everything, and the darkness at the end of time is still waiting for all of us. But for the first time in 2,000,000 years, I believe there might be light enough to push that darkness back. Not from the architects, not from any of the species I found over the millennia, but from a stubborn salvage operator who refused to give up on a broken ship and the species that raised him." Marcus smiled at that. feeling the weight of years and the lightness of hope in equal measure. "Vigil," he said. "Yes. Thank you for waiting for us, for not giving up, for believing we might be worth finding. Thank you for proving me right," she answered, "and thank you for being my friend. Marcus Chun, in all the time I have existed, I have never had a friend before." Outside the observation window, a fleet of human ships was preparing to launch, carrying explorers and scientists and dreamers toward distant stars. Using technology that combined architect wisdom with human innovation behind them, other species were watching and learning and slowly beginning to change. And at the center of it all, an ancient AI and an aging human sat together in comfortable silence, watching the seeds of the future take root. The universe was still dying, but for the first time in a very long time, something was being born to fight it. And that something was wonderful and strange and impossible, and human Vigil had spent 2 million years looking for a species worthy of her creator's legacy. In the end, what she found was not a successor to the architects, but something better. She found a partner. She found a family. She found hope. And as humanity reached for stars that ancient species had declared for out of reach, she knew that her long loneliness had finally come to an end. The seed had taken root, and what was growing from it would shake the foundations of the universe itself.